It's an Aussie pub tradition, but now there are calls to end happy hour to stop the violence. This morning on Sunrise, how our drinking culture needs to change.
It is 9 minutes past 7 o'clock. Well, very soon, just how far bosses can go in spying on their employees. But first, should happy hour be scrapped and the cost of alcohol increased to tackle binge drinking? Well, the radical suggestions come from a new group called the Alcohol Education and Rehabilitation Foundation. It's released research showing 1 in 5 Aussies has been directly affected by alcohol-related violence or knows someone who has. Well, the chair of the new foundation is Professor Ian Webster. Professor, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Look, we all know that alcohol-related violence has become a very big problem. Tell me about the impact that it's having on our community.
Well, you can see the impact in small communities and in some of the suburbs of our big cities. But the special place you see the impact is in our public hospitals. Up to 30% of the people presenting to the emergency departments have an alcohol-related injury. And then if you go inside the hospital and look at the psychiatric ward, the trauma units, even the general medical wards, you can see very many of the people are there because of alcohol. And so it has an enormous impact on the health system. And secondly, if you look at the work of a policeman, some years ago I did a survey of police officers' attitudes and found that 70% of them believed that their work was related to alcohol. In other words, they were dealing with alcohol-related crime and policing alcohol problems. So it's an enormous impact in the sense of it involving our services.
So 70%, given this is something that can almost be avoided, if not certainly controlled, where to from here is my next question to you now. The federal government's looking at spending $53 million. You've got some ideas that you've put forward. We'll have a quick look at them. The first one is that you want manufacturers to be encouraged to sell low alcohol products. Tell me how that would work. What would you do?
Well, first let me say that I think it's terrific that the Prime Minister has shown an interest in this and in providing some leadership, and as you say, a lot more has to be done. Well, the first thing that could be done and should be done is to alter the taxation policies. What we would like to see is that the safer an alcohol drink is, in other words, its content of alcohol, the lower price it is. So the taxing system ought to reflect that. That's technically described as volumetric taxing. At present, the easiest way and quickest way to get drunk is to buy a cask of wine, where you get the cheapest alcohol and the biggest bang from a cask.
So you'd like to make that more expensive, is that correct? And then sort of the low alcohol drinks cheaper?
Well, yes. I mean,
okay.
That's true, and to an extent that's happening with beer, but particularly with wines and the drinks that people use when they really want to get intoxicated, it's a cask of wine, as I've said, is the quickest way to get drunk.
Okay. You also want to reduce the number of alcohol outlets. Do you think government should intervene here? And do you want some clubs and bars and pubs shut down?
Well, the evidence across the world is that increasing the number of outlets and the density of outlets, in fact, in Sydney and in Melbourne and in Perth recently, studies have shown that the concentration of outlets in particular areas leads to increased local violence and damage to the local community. So when governments, through their licensing regulations, are determining new licences in particular, they should have regard to what's happening in local areas. And I think they should be getting advice from the local police, the local public hospital, and of course from the community itself when making those decisions.
All right, another one you've got is a restriction on trading hours. So tell me, how much do you think they should be restricted? Should we have a closing time?
Well, I think we inevitably should have a closing time, but again, the evidence worldwide is that if you liberalise the hours of drinking, as has happened recently in Britain and is happening in Australia, the amount of alcohol consumed increases and the amount of violence, particularly in the hubs of activity in cities and towns, increases, and there's more harm. So extended hours increase the problems, reducing the hours lessens the problems. And again, that's something which should be looked at in local, regional environments to determine what the nature of that community is and what elements of alcohol injury and violence and other problems can be tolerated there.
You also want a ban on exploitative promotion of alcohol, so where it's linked to sport or even to sex, the labelling of the bottles, sort of tighten the advertising codes. So look, it sounds like a very wide-ranging research and looking at this problem from many, many different ways, which is obviously the way to do it. So let us know how it all goes and stay in touch, and we'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
Many thanks, Melissa.
Thank you very much, Professor Webster. Thanks for your time.
Booze bust-ups. New research shows alcohol-fuelled fights are on the rise across Australia.
Well, alarming new research has revealed alcohol-fuelled violence is on the rise. Here's what you need to know about the study. 1 in 5 Australians are affected by alcohol-related violence. 14.5 million people believe there's a link between binge drinking and violence. Over 10 million Australians are worried about violence when they visit pubs and clubs. And of course, on paper, the situation sounds bad, but in reality, the human toll is far worse. Robin McCready, Brian's son, life was turned upside down after a night on the town. He was brutally bashed while celebrating his 20th birthday.
I remember saying to him, you know, when he started going into the city, please be careful. He said, oh, I can look after myself, typical 18, 19-year-old. As a lot of young men think, they think that they're invincible and...
bulletproof.
And he could, yeah, bulletproof.
You just can't imagine somebody would do this, can you?
It's like revulsion is what I feel more than anything. I can't understand it still. It's just appalling, and I just don't want it to have to happen to anybody else.
A simple catch-up with the friends and a couple of drinks turned into what's been now about 5.5 months in hospital and walking around with part of my head missing. Yeah.
Simple night outs turned into a horror story.
That's right, yeah.
60 Minutes reporting there. So joining us now is Daryl Smeaton from the Alcohol Education and Rehabilitation Foundation. Good morning to you, Daryl.
Good morning, Lisa.
Can I just start with those figures? They're huge figures, 10 million, 14.5 million. How did you come up with those sorts of numbers?
They are frightening figures. They come from a survey by Roy Morgan, one of their standard surveys that they run every couple of weeks, with proper demographic and geographic and age spread, and they are frightening.
Well, they certainly indicate that there are a lot of Australians who are very on side with this issue and doing something about it. How prevalent is the problem of alcohol-related violence in Australia right now?
It happens most weekends, certainly Friday and Saturday nights in every city, town and area of Australia. And the police see it, and emergency departments are almost overwhelmed on those nights by people coming in affected in some way by alcohol.
Is it on the rise? We've seen a lot about binge drinking in recent months, but alcohol-related violence has always been around, but is it worse?
Well, it appears to be. Certainly the police report that it is. Here in Sydney, I know that the research done by the Bureau of Crime Statistics indicates it's on the rise, and that's the message we're getting from all around the country.
What sort of effect is it having?
Well, I think you just saw some of the effects, the tragic stories that we see. A lot of it's not even reported though, and people only end up in hospital because their friends take them there. But it's deaths, it's maimings, it's those long-term problems, and sometimes it's just a very badly bruised face, loss of a few teeth. But it happens too often for it to be acceptable.
How do you plan to combat the problem?
Well, we know that the research everywhere in the world says you've got to address things like the number of outlets, so that's the density of clubs and pubs, etc., along with trading hours. But there is a first step, because we've got to get the federal government to take action around taxation of alcohol. It's all over the shop, it's unfair, it needs to be properly fixed. And then they need to remove alcohol from the national competition policy. Alcohol's not like eggs or milk or white goods. It's actually a drug, and it should be regulated accordingly.
The government's already getting $6 billion in alcohol tax, but they don't seem to have any clear plans on how to tackle this. How are you going to convince them that they need to do something?
I'm really encouraged by the government's position to date. I think Kevin Rudd's comments about 8 weeks ago are the first time a Prime Minister has raised alcohol and violence as a problem. So that's fantastic. They now need to do more. They've already started, and I don't want to say they haven't done anything wrong. But the things that the Alliance and the Alcohol Education and Rehabilitation Foundation are calling for today are the things that actually make a difference. That's what the evidence shows us all around the world.
There's obviously a lot of people watching today, according to those statistics, who feel strongly about it. If people do feel strongly, what can they do?
We've got a website, www.aerf.com.au. We invite Australians to tell us what they think will work, and we'll make sure that that gets to the government through Tim Costello, who's the director of the foundation.
OK, Daryl Smeaton, very good luck with it. Thanks for your help.
Thanks very much, Lisa.
Last month, the Prime Minister described drug and alcohol abuse in Australia as out of control and announced action. However, the National Alliance Against Alcohol-Related Violence is still waiting to see a detailed plan. The Alliance believes the problem of alcohol-related abuse is beyond the tipping point and is calling on the public to submit ideas on how to tackle the issue. And we'll hear from the Alliance this morning.
Yeah, very powerful alliance.
It has become increasingly rare to open a newspaper in this country and not read about alcohol-related abuse. How common the headlines: man beaten in pub brawl, wife feared for life at hands of drunken husband. The issue is of such concern that the Prime Minister recently admitted the problem was out of control.
Health agencies are so concerned they've united to form the National Alliance Against Alcohol-Related Violence and are urging the Rudd government to tackle the growing problem. Alliance member Daryl Smeaton joins us this morning. Good morning, Daryl.
Morning, Daryl.
Good morning, David. Morning, Kim.
Daryl, this morning the Alliance is going to release research that you commissioned into alcohol-related violence. What were the findings? What is the impact on the average Australian, do you think?
Well, it's frightening. 1 in 5 are telling us that they've either personally experienced or friends or family have personally experienced alcohol-related violence. 10 million Australians are telling us they think it's worse now than it was 3 years ago. They're frightening figures, and they highlight the issue in a way that is the Australian public calling for action.
If we're in the middle of an alcoholic crisis, as all reports seem to indicate, why are we not doing more? Why are we not shouting this from the rooftops?
Well, I think for the last 10 years, we've been told consistently by the federal government, the previous government, that the only drug problem was an illicit one. It's only been now in the last 8 weeks that Prime Minister Rudd has brought alcohol back onto the national agenda. And I think it's time for action. That's certainly what the Alliance is calling for, led by the Alcohol Education and Rehabilitation Foundation.
So the government's proposals, Kevin Rudd's proposals, are they in the right area? Is he going down the right path, do you think?
Look, they're a good start. They certainly won't do any harm, but they won't long-term make the sort of difference to the way we drink and what happens when we get drunk, that the sort of things that the Alliance is calling for today will.
Where does the education need to start, though? Where does the understanding that alcohol is a dangerous drug? I mean, do we start in schools? Is it parents' job? I mean, are parents showing kids a bad example by drinking at home?
Well, there's no question that we learn about 85% of our behaviours in the family home from our parents or our older siblings. So certainly families need to be aware that the way they drink will be copied by their children. But it's not really an issue about education in one sense. I think most people do understand that alcohol, when you take too much of it, makes you drunk. What they don't understand, because they haven't been told this, that it actually is a dangerous drug when it's misused. But they're the sort of things that need to be done over a long period of time. There are actions we can take now.
But you say that's not about education, but clearly it is about education if people don't understand the effects of alcohol and that it's a dangerous drug.
Look, I think people, Kim, do understand because they experience it, but I don't think it sinks into their consciousness enough. But if you're going to change that sort of behaviour or understanding, that takes a long time. If you think about what we did with drink driving or with skin cancer...
Or cigarettes.
Those campaigns have been... Well, cigarettes as well. Those campaigns have been running for 25 to 30 years. So a short, sharp television campaign won't make much difference. But we've got to have better education, I agree. But there are some big policy things that the Alliance today is calling for that will make a difference to the things that really matter, like the availability of alcohol and its price.
It's interesting, isn't it? The outlets, the number of alcohol outlets, bars and clubs as well as retail outlets, has increased extraordinarily over the last 20 years. And you've said already that, and we know alcohol is a drug, but is it regulated as such? Is that a concern?
It's not regulated as a drug, and that's part of the problem. The National Competition Policy says we have to deregulate things to create better competition. But alcohol's not like eggs or milk or white goods. It is a drug, and it needs to be regulated as a drug. It is one of those interesting ones, of course, because you can use it safely. So it's not like tobacco or illicit drugs, but when you use it badly, it can create the harms that we see that cost us $15 billion a year.
Well, when we consider that $6.4 billion a year comes in alcohol taxes, how much of that goes towards education, prevention and treatment?
3/5 of 5/8 of nothing at all. Other than the recent $50 million, over the last decade there's been less than $100 million spent directly on alcohol, compared with $2.5 billion on illicit drugs.
So it's just pathetically inadequate.
Of course it is, and that's now, I think, where we've got a Prime Minister and a federal government who say it is a problem, we need to look at alcohol. That's an encouraging sign, and we're now wanting to let the Prime Minister and the Premiers and the Australian public know that there are things that can be done.
So, as you just suggested there, it seems to me that it needs to eke down through government, through state government, even to councils. We've all seen footage over the last couple of years of street scenes, of people partying in the streets. Since when did that happen, and how do we stop that?
Well, look, I think this is... I have a great deal of sympathy for local government, because they're the ones who have to clean up the mess on Friday and Saturday mornings. The broken glass, the vomit, the blood on shop windows, the broken park furniture and so on. And yet they have little power to influence the number of outlets and no power at all to limit the closing hours. But we do have some action. Recently, the Newcastle City Council got some changes through the Licensing Administration Board that will make a difference in Newcastle, but it happens everywhere. So we've got some advice for local governments that they can take. They can access that on our website today on www.aerf.com.au. But it's the federal government and the state governments that need to start the process around reducing availability and limiting trading hours.
Now, I'm presuming that that's going to be one of the suggestions made when this research is made public in both Sydney and Melbourne simultaneously today, because I want to talk about those sorts of policy changes that you touched on earlier.
Yes, we've got 4 things to suggest. We need to address the alcohol taxation system. It's unfair, and it needs to be changed to encourage manufacturers, producers, particularly of spirits and wine, in a way that will encourage them to produce lower alcohol products. We need to remove alcohol from the National Competition Policy because it's a drug and it needs to be regulated accordingly. And then we need the states and territories to look at their licensing, reduce the number of outlets and reduce trading hours or opening times or closing times, such that we don't have to have huge crowds of intoxicated people on the streets at 3 and 4 a.m.
So you've identified that as an adequate way of dealing with this. It doesn't push the problem beneath the carpet in any way.
No, it doesn't. I don't think it does. And these are suggestions that are based in research evidence. All around the world, it's shown that if you can adjust the price of alcohol using the taxation system, if you can adjust the number of outlets and their trading hours, then you can actually reduce consumption. And if you reduce consumption, you reduce harm.
Does that work as well in the home then, where there's alcohol-related violence in the home?
Look, anything that reduces consumption can have an effect. And of course, Kim, you've identified the hidden violence. What we see on our television screens is the public manifestation, but we know it happens in family homes. We know that spouses and children suffer from alcohol abuse, perpetrated violence on them through intoxication. But overall, if we can reduce consumption, if we can then long-term have programs that really talk about how to prevent some of these things, the measures we're calling for today are the big start, but there then needs to be an ongoing campaign to address the issues.
And you're also calling for submissions from the public, aren't you?
Yes, and look, the public is concerned. That's what the Roy Morgan research shows. So we believe that Australians are very clever people. They understand the problem. They know some of the things that work. There have been some great programs in communities around the country that do work. And, you know, they're driven by the Australian public and by their local community groups. We need to have that on a national scale.
Well, at least you've got the opportunity to put your case forward at the 2020 summit. Thanks so much, Darryl. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you for your time,
Thanks,
Darryl.
Kim. Thanks, David.
Calls for tighter controls to stop the increase in alcohol-fuelled violence. Alcohol-related violence is on the rise, according to disturbing new statistics released today. A Roy Morgan poll found almost 1 in 5 Australians has endured violence related to alcohol or had a friend or relative who